Hello and welcome. I'm Goblin, and at the time of this video's release, tomorrow is Halloween. How exciting. So what better way to celebrate than to gather around the fire and listen to some strange stories. And these stories are indeed strange. They come from the website Your Ghost Stories, my favorite place to read first-hand paranormal accounts. In between the stories, we'll read interesting comments and discuss some relevant topics, such as folklore, as it comes up. If all that sounds like a good time to you, let's get started. Our first story was submitted by Vulcan10 from Oklahoma, and it's called Late Night Lake Experience. In the early 90s, I lived in Oakwood Harbor, and the guard at the little guard shack was a rather attractive, tall, slim woman, and I happened to pass by on several occasions late at night on her overnight shift. One night, I don't remember what day, but it was a weekday in the summertime. This car came flying in off the highway, and a guy jumped out and was all panicky and saying to call the police or someone. Something was out by the bridge, which ran across Eufaula Lake. I went with the guard because this guy really had me curious. We went to the bridge and there were several cars parked on the side of the road. The people had gotten out of their cars and were just standing on the shoulder, looking up in an eerie, weird sort of way. We got out and looked at them, then each other, and then we looked up. There was no noise or anything, but when I looked up, there was a black void, a good 100 yards across or more, hanging in the sky. The stars were all around it, and the moon was bright enough to light up the shoreline as far as the eye could see, but in that large spot, there was nothing. Less than nothing. You could just tell. I was horrified in a way that I couldn't recognize, and I still don't understand now. I don't know how long we stood there, but the next thing I knew, it moved. Slowly starting to lift and drift some, and then just took off at an unbelievable speed. Everyone came out of the trance-like thing we were in and just got back into their cars and left. When we got back to the guard shack, I just walked back home and went to bed. We never talked about that, and as a matter of fact, I don't recall if I ever spoke to her again, since she left for another state soon thereafter. I started believing it was a dream. Now, I'm not so sure. I like that story. I could picture it all perfectly, like a scene from a movie. Imagine looking up into the sky and seeing a void, a spot blacker than black amongst the stars. It's sort of Lovecraftian. Strange, too, how after it had gone, everyone just quietly got back in their cars and went on their way. It definitely has notes of a UFO experience. Someone commented under this story with a similar experience. They wrote, "This story actually reminds me of an experience I had when I was younger. My family and I were sitting at a campfire making s'mores when my grandma suddenly told us to look at the sky. There was a giant ball of bright white light moving across the sky. We were all sitting there watching this light when my grandma dropped her s'more. We all looked at her, and when we looked back at the sky, the ball of light was gone. To this day, I believe that it was a UFO." Hey, it had to be serious if Grandma dropped her s'more, because I'm not letting go of one of those things. No, in all seriousness, that's a very interesting story, and you can see some strange things when you're out in the middle of the woods, camping, away from all of the light pollution and artificial light we have in the city, suburbs, civilization. For now, let's move on to our next story. This one was submitted by Chickenosaurus from Virginia, and it's called Creature's Head. A few years ago, I was separating and matching socks on my mother's bed. The feeling of being watched came over me, so I leaned over to look through the big windows and saw nothing. There was a tiny window behind me, but no one could possibly be looking through that because it's so high up. And there was an opened closet at my other side, full of clothes, so no one could fit in there without being noticed. The same creepy feeling was present even after verifying that I was alone. I continued doing laundry. I found myself wishing there was something to watch on TV. The being watched feeling finally got the best of me, and I just had to turn my head towards the closet for reassurance. There, I stared at this floating, animal-like head, no more than 2 feet from my face. I tried to get to my feet, but I was frozen in fear before I could run. It was dog-like, with a long snout. Its fur was white and clean-looking, with longer fur at the sides of its face and neck area. At the sides of its head, it had long, curly locks of the same fur, but the locks of fur reached past my field of view towards the floor. The lips were very thin and pale, but evident. Its nose was similarly vague, only instead of what you would expect a dog to have, this creature's nose was flat, with slits like a reptile's. It just stared at me with oversized, black, emotionless eyes. I don't recall seeing a reflection in them. I finally gathered the courage to hightail it out of the room, but my curiosity got the best of me. Just as I was exiting the room, I had to look back to confirm it was real. I had to see the creature. I watched it slowly begin to turn its head towards my direction, which only encouraged me to run even faster all the way into the living room and jump on the couch. I informed my mother that I wasn't going back into the room, and that was that. First of all, when it comes to high strangeness, never count out the tiny, high-up window or closet full of clothes. You might think it's implausible for something to be lurking there, but you just never know, right? I've definitely felt paranoid before and checked my completely packed closet to make sure that no one's crouching all folded up in there somehow. I found this story to be so intriguing and bizarre, and the way the creature's head slowly turned towards her as the author fled the room was a pretty chilling visual. While I don't think anyone can be completely sure what this apparition was or why it appeared, I did find one comment to be interesting that offered a possible suggestion to the creature's identity. 510 MOT wrote, "Freaky. To be honest, the only thing I know of remotely like this is the swamp spirit we Cajuns called the loup-garou, or the moondog. Though not exactly, and why only the head appeared is beyond me." So the loup-garou is basically the French word for werewolf. I know I'm saying that horribly, by the way. And in Cajun folklore, it's also sometimes called rougarou, which is just an adaptation of the original French word to suit the Cajun dialect. Our commenter here also refers to it as the moondog, a name I haven't seen referenced anywhere else, but it does make sense as a nickname for a werewolf. The rougarou is pretty similar to the standard, classic werewolf as we know it, though with some differences, such as the ability to shapeshift into other forms besides a wolf. It's sometimes known to take the form of a vehicle-stricken calf and lay on the side of the road. When a driver spots the animal and pulls over to examine it, they may find a solitary man now in its place. They also lack the ability to be able to count past 12. The reason for this, I'm not sure. Maybe it's because that's as high as the clock goes? I don't know. But if you want to keep a rougarou out of your house, just place 13 objects in front of your door. They'll stop to count the objects and become confused, unable to count past 12, and will obsessively start the count over again until the sun comes up and they have to leave. Kinda silly, right? So it doesn't seem like the creature in the story we read really resembles the rougarou other than the dog or wolf-like appearance. And the person who commented that does say as much, but still, it was a very interesting legend to learn about. The southern bayous and Cajun country are some of the most culturally rich parts of the United States. On the subject of dogs, let's move on to our next story. This story took place in Nicaragua and was submitted by Jade Ray. It's called The Cadejo. This incident happened to my husband a long time ago, before he met me. This story is unusual for him because Ramon is from a small city in Nicaragua and grew up hearing stories about supernatural beings such as Chupacabra and La Llorona. However, with a civil war going on around him, he became very aware of danger from living people and less concerned with the otherworldly. As a result, he generally gives little thought to the supernatural. During the summer breaks at college, he would work his stepfather's land in the north of the country, tending the animals and mending fences. He enjoyed the physical work and the extra cash he earned for the upcoming semester. One evening, just after sunset, he was finishing up some work alone and gathering up his tools to go back to the house when, from the darkness of trees and brush, a white dog emerged, wagging its tail and walking up to Ramon. The dog acted happy and playful. It was a medium-sized dog, nothing remarkable about it except its color, which in the glow of Ramon's light seemed to be all white. Ramon, an animal lover, patted the dog on the head, ruffled up its fur along its back, and then found a small stick to toss for it. As the dog trotted for the stick that lay about 30 feet away in the dirt, Ramon noticed that even though the dog was walking away from him, it seemed to be growing in size. By the time the dog reached the stick, it looked to be at least a foot or two taller, larger than a greyhound, about the size of a small donkey. The dog happily returned with the stick, wagging its tail with a playful demeanor, seeming to shrink as it approached him and was normal-sized again. Ramon felt something strange was definitely going on, so he gestured to the dog to get away and told him to get out of there, to go home. The dog trotted back into the darkness, growing in size again, but was soon out of sight. When Ramon returned to the house, he asked the other farmhands if anyone had a white dog, saying it was running loose on the property. The farmhands said that no one had a light-colored dog, at least no one they knew, and no one had seen a loose dog. He told them about his encounter. They said that it sounds like he was blessed with a visit from the cadejo. In Nicaragua, a white cadejo is considered good luck, or at least a neutral encounter. A black cadejo is bad luck, and may even attack you and hurt or kill you. Sometimes cadejos are described as having horns or other non-canine features. Ramon saw no horns, but has no explanation on how the animal could change in size so obviously. Ramon thinks that what he saw on his stepdad's land was a cadejo, that he knew in his gut this was no normal dog. He was out on the property, far from anything reflective that would skew his perspective. He did make inquiries with neighbors about dogs that could match the description, but no one came forward with any known dog of that coloring in the area. He's just grateful it was a white cadejo. Fascinating story, right? It was mentioned at the end of the story that this creature, the cadejo, comes in two colors, white and black. The author's husband was from Nicaragua, but this legend is known in various parts of Central America: El Salvador, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, and even parts of Mexico and Texas. Before we go into it further, let's read this comment from Mary that says, "My husband is from Guatemala and encountered the white and black cadejo many times when he was a young boy and in his early teens. Yes, he should be glad he saw the white one. The black cadejo seems to protect my husband and walk him home, or that's what he thought. Never attacked him, even when he growled and seemed to be mad." Let me read this excerpt from the Encyclopedia of Beasts and Monsters in Myth, Legend, and Folklore by Teresa Bain. The cadejo is a cow-sized dog from Central American folklore and described as having a shaggy coat of either black or white hair and cloven feet. If you should happen to see a white cadejo, it is said good fortune is heading your way and the creature will protect you while you travel on a dangerous journey. There is never a good situation in which seeing a black-haired cadejo is beneficial. There are 3 species of black cadejo. The first is the devil himself, assuming this form, and anyone who he catches will not only be slain, but their souls will be immediately dragged to hell. The second species of black cadejo is a terrible anthropophagous, or man-eating, monster. The third variation of the cadejo is a hybrid of the first 2, a dangerous, frightening, and strong creature which may be killed by a well-armed individual. In a variation of the folklore, the cadejo is a large black dog with a shaggy coat and white spot of fur on its chest. only ever seen at night near burial places. If left alone, the cadejo will walk ahead of the traveler in the middle of the road. Otherwise, it will attack without mercy. No matter how its sighting is resolved, it is always a death omen, either for the person who sees it or someone in his family. Okay, interesting. So I did a video not too long ago on death omens or harbingers of death, and I could really only find mostly Celtic ones. So it's interesting to find one from Central America now, the cadejo, the black cadejo specifically. It's said that the white cadejo was created by God and the black by Satan. The legend can serve to either caution people from traveling lonely roads at night, and if you do, to be aware of your surroundings, or it can ease people's anxieties by making them think they have a guardian on late-night journeys. I thought that a particularly interesting element of the story was how the cadejo changed size based on its proximity to Ramon. This is not unheard of behavior for the cadejo. I found another anecdote referencing this on a website called Spooky Tales. They have an article with a lot of information on El Cadejo, as well as a full podcast episode dedicated to the subject. One of the stories they share is this. In 1949, a young man walked late at night. As he walked, he noticed a small black dog. The black dog followed him and would only stare and stare when he tried to shoo it away. Whenever he turned away from the dog and looked back, it would grow bigger in size. He was scared and drew his revolver, aimed, and fired at the dog. The bullet left the gun in slow motion and then fell, intact at the man's feet. When he looked up, the dog was the size of a horse. He fired his revolver again, but the same thing happened. So then he yelled out, "Hail Mary, most pure." After that, the black dog disappeared. So, that is the legend of the cadejo. Black dogs are also a huge part of the folklore of the British Isles. They go by several names. There's the Black Shuck or the Grim, and they generally are a bad omen, a death omen, just regarded as evil or dangerous in general. That's a subject that I find very interesting, and I do intend to visit one day. But now let's go on to our next story. This one was submitted by Laura Ann from the UK. It's called Something at My Window. For the first 3 years of my life, we lived in a small bungalow next to a wood in Wales, which my parents bought and renovated not long before me and my younger brother were born. The event in my story, I believe, took place when I was between 2 and 4 years old, as my brother had not been born yet, so I had a bedroom all to myself. I remember it clearly, despite being in my 20s now, and having not been in that house for over 20 years. I would like to add that I was a very active child, always climbing on things and running around the wood, to the best of my ability anyway, considering I was just a toddler. My bedroom was average-sized, with one large window and a chest of drawers on one wall, and my single bed and a doorway on the opposite wall. The window was in the middle of the wall and quite high up, unless I climbed on my bed or chest of drawers. I remember waking up one night, hearing something tapping at the window. I got up and opened one curtain slightly to see a glowing purple or blue light just on the other side of the glass, about 15 centimeters tall. I don't know if it was an orb or not because it was fairly solid and clear to make out. I didn't feel threatened by it and was overwhelmed with curiosity as I'd never seen anything like it before. It was an uneven oval shape, almost the shape of an upright oak leaf, and was dark in the middle, but glowing bright from the edges. Now it gets strange. This orb had a face, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. I went to sit on the windowsill to get a better look by climbing on the chest of drawers, and it spoke to me. I can't remember what it said, as it was so long ago, but I remember feeling that it was very interested in me, like its whole purpose in being there was to speak to me. I would ask it, "What do you want? Why are you here?" To which I couldn't get it to answer. I began to feel scared of it at this point, perhaps because the orb began to be less friendly, or it wanted to make me feel scared now that it had my attention. I didn't say any more to it and climbed down from the windowsill and ran to my parents' bed as fast as possible. I didn't tell them what I saw, so they thought nothing of me climbing into their bed. I remember waking up the next morning in my parents' room and then remembering what happened during the night and how I got from my bedroom to my parents' bedroom. It was definitely not a dream. This experience has always been a very clear memory. In fact, it may be my earliest memory. Although I remember it so clearly, I've always been a sensible child, and so my common sense told me to dismiss it. I told myself, floating glowing faces just don't exist. The current owners of our old house invited a friend around one night who happens to be sensitive towards the paranormal. Their friend told them of an old lady spirit who carried water from a well outside and along a path into the house. We didn't know this at the time we lived there, but now I know this. It has given me permission to accept my experience as paranormal. I don't know about you, but there's something particularly creepy to me about seeing faces or entities in windows. There's something very unsettling and perhaps even threatening about someone or something peering into your home. The inside of your dwelling and the outside may as well be separate worlds. For ideally, in your home you feel comfortable and safe, almost untouchably so at times, right? The outside is a realm that exists completely apart from the walls, doors, and windows of your house and is teeming with uncertainty. So I really can't imagine how I'd feel if I saw this floating purple blob with a face looking in through my window and talking. I feel like I'd be pretty freaked out. So it's surprising that the author wasn't at first. What do you think this being was? Was it a ghost? As the author mentioned at the end of their story, the possibility of the house being haunted. Or was it something else? Maybe it was something attached to the woods that was behind her house. Whatever it was, it seemed to have an intelligence to it. I wish the author could remember what the blob had said to her. What a great story, though. Definitely some high strangeness. It's time to move on to our last story of the night. It also took place in the UK, so my friend James is going to read it for us in his beautiful Irish accent. The story is called Faerie, Visitation.
This is not a ghost story, but still a tale of spiritual entities. I've been searching my whole life for an explanation of the following. In 1964, I was 5 and would shortly be put in a children's home. I shared the back bedroom with my grandfather. His bed was in the centre of the room, and my bed was against the outside wall, offering me a view of the sky in the gap between the curtain and the window. I hadn't yet been asleep, and grandfather was in his bed. The sky was a deep blue, turning darker with the dusk, completely cloudless except for a tiny round cloud in the far distance and coming from the north. It was getting bigger as it was heading directly towards me. What's more, I could then see another such cloud far behind it, and yet another behind that. A string of small round clouds heading towards me, spread out in a line. As they came closer, I could see the clouds were being ridden as one rides a horse, by men of around 14 inches tall, with black hair and full black beards, wearing pointed conical metal helmets. In their left hands they carried round shields, and in their right hand they each held a trident. By now the first one had reached the top of my window, which was open, and one of the little men pushed against the gap as if trying to gain entry. This was enough for me, so I got into bed with Grandad, ensuring he was between me and the window. Now, next to me, against the inner bedroom wall, was a single gentleman's wardrobe. I saw this was now draped in a patterned material, and the 4 cloud riders were stationed on each top corner standing to attention as if on guard. Then, the wardrobe door opened to reveal a fairy girl of around 3 foot in height, with long straight black hair, pale white skin, and wearing a garment of pure white light. She was staring directly at me with an expressionless face. As if all this wasn't enough, suddenly, what I have always described as a cobweb of energy appeared in the far corner of the room, and into it, the fairy with her escorts disappeared. I described the apparition as a cobweb of energy due to its round shape and the position it occupied in the corner between the walls and the ceiling. It was comprised of circular bands of multicoloured light that could be seen when it was dark, but didn't emit light. When I awoke the following morning, it was still there. When I came home from school and went to my room, it was still there. Day and night for 2 weeks, it remained. My mother can still remember me pointing to what appeared to her to be an empty space and asking, "What's that?" She, of course, could see nothing and dismissed it with the closed mind of adults by telling me how she had seen things when she had been delirious with pneumonia. But I wasn't sick. I just returned from a normal day at school. As an adult, I have tried to make sense of all this, reading whatever books I can find on the subject. Though I find accounts of people claiming to stumble upon the Fae in their natural setting, I have not read of them travelling specifically to visit a human, and so I wonder, why me? I have read, though, of the Fae taking children, especially the unwanted and unchristened, both applicable to me, to be replaced by a dead changeling. Maybe the cobweb of energy was a more benevolent entity, sent to protect and guard me from this fate. I still do not have an answer.
This story is so unique and bizarre, it almost sounds like a very vivid dream. But the author is adamant in the comments that it most certainly was not, a fact they are sure of over 50 years after its occurrence. So, do you think this was an actual visitation from fairies or something else? Sometimes encounters with fairies bear remarkable similarities to UFO encounters. By the way, if you like fairy stories, and I don't mean fairy tales, I mean real encounters with fairies, then I have another video in the series dedicated solely to experiences with fairies. And my next video will also explore the topic of first-hand fairy interactions. I don't want to give away much more than that, but definitely tune in if you're interested in that subject. That should be out on November 13th. Also, this is the second video I've done reading stories of high strangeness. If you'd like to see the other one, I'll have it linked in the description of this video. And it'll probably pop up in a second or two on the screen here as well. Thank you all for joining me on this Halloween, or whenever time it is you're listening. And I'll see you all next time.